Emma had been humming softly as she carried the brown paper bag of food through the sleek glass doors of Ryan's office building, her heart light with anticipation. She had been working long nights drafting a new design proposal, and this lunch was meant as a surprise, a small gesture of love to remind him that, even in their busy schedules, they were still building a future together. But when she pushed open the half-closed office door, the world seemed to tilt violently beneath her feet. Ryan wasn't at his desk, and laughter, soft, intimate, and horribly familiar, drifted from the corner. Her best friend Lauren's voice. For a heartbeat, Emma thought she must be mistaken, but then she saw them, Lauren perched on Ryan's desk, his hands tangled in her hair, lips pressing against skin that Emma had trusted both of them to respect. The bag slipped from her fingers, the sound of shattering glass containers echoing too loudly in the enclosed space. Ryan's head jerked up, eyes widening, mouth fumbling with the useless excuse, "It's not what it looks like." But the truth was right there, undeniable, burning into Emma's chest like a cruel brand. In that moment, Emma couldn't move, couldn't speak. Every breath felt sharp, like broken glass cutting through her lungs. This wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal on the deepest level. Ryan wasn't just her fiancé, he was supposed to be her partner in life, her safe place. And Lauren wasn't just a friend, she was the friend. The one who knew Emma's fears, her late-night doubts, the secrets she had whispered over wine and laughter. The sting was doubled, a cruel symmetry. The man she loved and the woman she trusted had carved out a space together that was never meant to exist. Ryan's words, hollow, pathetic, only deepened the wound. Emma realized that the silence between them, that heavy pause where love should have rushed to reassure her, was louder than any confession. She backed away, her hands trembling, her vision blurring, her entire reality collapsing in on itself. It wasn't just the loss of love she was feeling, it was the death of certainty, of safety, of trust itself. By evening, the story wasn't hers anymore. Ryan's family name carried weight in their small city, their construction empire woven into every street and skyline. Whispers spread like wildfire. Emma, the almost bride, humiliated before the wedding could even take place. Strangers pitied her, acquaintances gossiped, and friends exchanged pitying looks when they thought she wasn't watching. She felt branded, her identity reduced to a cautionary tale of misplaced trust. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, Emma held her engagement ring in her palm. It seemed heavier now, almost burning into her skin, not a promise of love, but a symbol of everything that had been stolen from her in one brutal moment. She stared at it until her eyes blurred, then whispered to herself, voice breaking, "If this is love, I don't want it." And in that small declaration, raw, broken, but resolute, the seeds of her transformation were planted. The audience doesn't just see a woman destroyed, they see a woman standing at the edge of reinvention. Emma had always lived her life with an almost stubborn belief in loyalty. Raised by her single mother, Clara, who worked double shifts at a diner to keep food on the table, Emma learned early that love wasn't about flowers or grand gestures, it was about sacrifice, dependability, and showing up even when it was hard. Clara never remarried, never brought fleeting romances into the house, because she didn't want Emma to see instability. Instead, Emma grew up idolizing her mother's strength, carrying with her the notion that love should be steady, like the foundation of the buildings she would one day design as an architect. Ryan had seemed to embody all of that, dependable, secure, polished, the very safety she craved after a childhood filled with financial uncertainty. But Lauren, her childhood best friend, had always been the opposite, dazzling, impulsive, unpredictable. Emma clung to her anyway, because Lauren had been there in the quietest moments of her childhood, the one who sat with her on curbs when her mother worked late, the one who promised she'd never leave. That promise, Emma now realized, was the cruelest betrayal of all. Lauren had known every fear, every secret wound Emma carried, especially her terror of being abandoned. And it was that knowledge she twisted, weaponized, to take from Emma the very man she had believed would finally give her peace. Now, stripped of both her fiancé and her best friend, Emma found herself in a tiny one-bedroom apartment whose walls still smelled of old paint and disinfectant. She couldn't even afford proper furniture, her meals were eaten cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes, the glow of takeout cartons her only company. Nights were the worst. The silence pressed in, a stark contrast to the busy hum of the life she'd once shared with Ryan. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it was fractured by dreams where his voice called her name, only for her to wake to the hollow emptiness of an apartment too quiet to belong to someone alive. And yet, beneath the despair that clung to her like a second skin, something small and stubborn burned. Resilience. Maybe it was inherited from her mother's unyielding spirit, maybe it was the architect in her, someone who believed ruins could be rebuilt. Every night as she lay staring at the ceiling, Emma told herself that pain was a blueprint too, lines and cracks that mapped where she had been, and where she might go. For now, survival looked like greasy noodles from a takeout box, thrift store blankets, and the hope that one day this brokenness would mean something more than just loss. Emma wasn't entirely alone, even if it often felt that way. Her younger sister Grace, fiery and protective, visited often, barging into Emma's apartment with groceries, tough love, and the kind of loyalty Emma no longer dared to trust in anyone else. Grace's presence was a reminder that not all bonds fractured under pressure, some grew stronger. Then there was Michael, the quiet lawyer she'd met by chance at the leasing office while signing her rental papers. His smile was subdued, his voice steady, but his eyes carried a weight she recognized: heartbreak. Later, she would learn about his divorce, about the pieces of his own life he was trying to reassemble, but in that first meeting, what mattered was that he saw her. Not the scandalized woman whispered about in town, not the fiancé discarded like an old plan, but a person trying to start again. Still, Emma's stakes were more than emotional. She hadn't just lost love, she had lost the carefully constructed future she had built her entire life around. Her dream of starting her own architecture firm had been tied to Ryan's connections, to the idea of shared resources and stability. Now, she was on her own, cut off from the networks she once thought would secure her place in the world. To rebuild meant starting not from the ground up, but from beneath the rubble of betrayal. And that made every choice she faced now a battle between despair and the faint, flickering hope of becoming someone stronger. The envelope arrived without warning, tucked neatly among utility bills and junk mail, its crisp white paper stamped with the logo of Ryan's family's construction empire. Emma opened it casually, expecting perhaps another final detail about the cancelled wedding. Instead, what she unfolded was an itemized invoice: deposits lost, cancellation fees, venue charges, all listed in cold, detached numbers. At the bottom, her name appeared not as a bride but as a debtor, a liability to be settled. It wasn't even from Ryan himself, but from his father's office, as if her broken heart were merely another transaction to close out. For a moment, Emma stared at it, numb, her throat tight with humiliation. This wasn't grief anymore, it was erasure, an attempt to reduce her love, her years of devotion, to a balance sheet. Something inside her cracked, but instead of collapsing, it hardened. She grabbed a pen, her hand shaking, and scrawled across the page in bold, furious strokes: "Paid in full, with my soul." Folding it carefully, she sealed it back in its envelope and marched to the nearest mailbox. Dropping it inside, she felt her chest rise with a sharp, unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't closure, not yet. But it was defiance. The smallest, fiercest first step toward reclaiming the self they had tried to strip from her that night, the weight of everything pressed too heavy for her small apartment walls to contain. Emma carried her laundry basket to the basement of her building, hoping the hum of the machines would drown out her spiraling thoughts. But as she sat on the cold tile floor, watching the washer spin, the tears came anyway, quiet at first, then unstoppable. She buried her face in her hands, ashamed of how broken she still felt, when a gentle voice interrupted. "Rough night." Michael, the quiet lawyer she had met at the leasing office, stood in the doorway holding a bag of detergent. His eyes softened, but he didn't rush forward, didn't flood her with platitudes or promises that it would all get better. Instead, he simply sat across from her, close enough to feel his presence but not suffocating. For the first time since the betrayal, someone let her hurt without trying to fix it, without making her feel small for still bleeding. Michael didn't pry, didn't ask for explanations, he just listened when her sobs broke into scattered words about invoices and humiliation. "That's cruel," he said quietly, and the validation was enough to steady her breath. In that laundry room, amid the scent of detergent and the steady churn of machines, Emma realized that sometimes the greatest kindness wasn't action, but space. And Michael had given her exactly that. By morning, the storm inside her had shifted. Emma knew she couldn't keep letting Ryan's shadow define her story. Every headline, every whisper in town painted her as the woman discarded, the fiancé left behind. But she was more than that, and if they wouldn't see it, she would make them. Sitting cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, she pulled out her sketchbook, flipping through pages of designs she had once dreamed of building under Ryan's company name. Now, the idea of attaching his legacy to her work made her stomach turn. No, she would build something of her own, even if it meant starting with nothing but paper and grit. She could see it in her mind, a firm that carried her name, her mother's lessons, her resilience carved into every blueprint. The path ahead was terrifying. She had no investors, no network, no safety net. But she had herself. And for the first time, that seemed like enough. The invoice that had meant to diminish her had instead lit a fire. Emma whispered aloud to the empty room, her voice steady. "I'm not done. I'm just beginning." It wasn't a grand declaration, not yet, but it was the pivot. The moment her story shifted from victimhood to reclamation. And though she didn't know it then, that choice would ripple outward into battles, heartbreaks, and unexpected connections that would shape the woman she was destined to become. Emma quickly learned that starting over was not as romantic as the self-help books promised. Every morning she woke up in her tiny apartment, the walls still bare and her savings dwindling with every bill, and forced herself to sit at her makeshift desk, a thrift store table that wobbled if she leaned too hard. She sent out proposal after proposal, hoping to secure projects, but rejection emails stacked up like a second rent she couldn't afford. Some didn't respond at all, others politely dismissed her, citing lack of resources or experience. Beneath the surface, she knew Ryan's family name carried whispers in the industry. Their influence stretched far, and doors that had once been open to her were now quietly bolted shut. Each no cut deeper, feeding the gnawing fear that maybe she wasn't good enough on her own. Money ran tight, and nights were filled with ramen noodles and lukewarm tea. Yet every time despair crept too close, Emma would touch her mother's old sketchbook, tracing the faded pencil lines. It reminded her that creativity couldn't be blacklisted, and for as long as she could draw, she still had a chance. But if the professional roadblocks weren't enough, Lauren's cruelty made sure Emma never forgot the personal wound. Online, Lauren posted carefully staged pictures with Ryan, expensive dinners, champagne toasts, weekend trips. The captions were daggers disguised as sweetness, "When love chooses you back," or "Some things are just meant to be." Each one was a public performance of triumph, as if Lauren were dancing on the ashes of Emma's old life. Emma tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but late at night she found herself scrolling anyway, her chest tightening with each smiling photograph. The whispers in her mind grew louder. Maybe Ryan had chosen Lauren because she was more lovable, more captivating, more enough. The cracks of self-doubt widened, threatening to swallow the fragile resilience Emma had begun to build. Still, in those moments, Grace's fiery encouragement and Michael's quiet steadiness anchored her. Grace reminded her she wasn't broken, just bruised, while Michael's presence, subtle but unwavering, showed her that listening could be a form of love too. Together, they kept her from drowning completely. The fragile progress Emma made came to a head just as she finally landed her first independent client, a small boutique cafe owner who loved her designs and believed in her vision. For the first time, Emma felt her new life shifting from dream to reality. But the victory was short-lived. A thick envelope arrived, this one not from Ryan's father, but from Ryan himself, a legal notice threatening to sue her for stealing designs. The accusation was a lie. The sketches in question had been hers from the beginning, drawn long before Ryan ever touched them. But the move was calculated, designed not to win, but to break her spirit and drain her already limited finances. Holding the letter in her shaking hands, Emma felt fury coil with fear. The man who had once promised to protect her was now actively trying to destroy her, and Lauren, no doubt, was cheering from the sidelines. This was more than heartbreak, it was war. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into a battle Emma hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. And though she felt her knees tremble, one truth crystallized: if she surrendered now, they would own not just her past, but her future. The courtroom felt like a stage, every gaze fixed on Emma as she stood opposite the two people who had once been the pillars of her life. Ryan, sharp in his tailored suit, wore the smug expression of a man convinced he would win not just the case, but the narrative. Lauren sat beside him, her polished exterior hiding the venom Emma knew lurked underneath. Ryan's legal team opened with an attack on Emma's credibility, suggesting she was unstable, emotional, incapable of handling projects on her own. They painted her as the jilted fiancée desperate for revenge, exploiting her heartbreak to sabotage a reputable company. The words cut deep, echoing the very insecurities that had haunted her since the betrayal. But Emma, clutching the folder of her designs, refused to shrink. When her turn came, she laid out her work methodically, sketches dated, blueprints signed, contracts drafted long before Ryan had ever touched them. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall she was rebuilding around herself. For the first time, she didn't just defend her career, she defended herself. Every word she spoke, steady and deliberate, chipped away at the caricature Ryan's lawyers tried to paint, but the real turning point came when Michael rose for cross-examination. Calm and precise, he asked Ryan simple questions that unraveled into a web of contradictions. Then he turned to Lauren. His voice was deceptively gentle as he slid a folder across the table. Inside were emails, digital footprints that revealed a betrayal deeper than Emma had imagined. Lauren had been secretly sharing entries from Emma's personal journal with Ryan for years. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Those late-night confessions Emma had once believed were safe with her best friend, her fears of abandonment, her doubts about her worth, her insecurities about love had been weaponized. Ryan hadn't just known where to press to break her, he had been handed the map. The truth landed like a thunderclap. Lauren tried to deflect, to claim it was harmless, but the evidence was undeniable. Emma sat frozen, the air knocked from her lungs, but as shock turned to clarity, she realized something monumental. Their betrayal had never been about her weakness. It had been about their need to control her strength. When the verdict came in her favor, Emma didn't feel triumph in the way she expected. It wasn't about winning the case or proving Ryan wrong, it was about finally reclaiming her voice. Standing tall, she faced them both, her former fiancé and her former friend, and spoke the words she had been too afraid to say, "You didn't break me. You freed me." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause, because it was final. Ryan's smugness faltered, Lauren's composure cracked, but Emma felt lighter than she had in years. The courtroom was no longer just a battlefield, it was the place where she buried the version of herself who had once begged for love at any cost. Walking out with Michael at her side, she carried nothing from them anymore. Not their lies, not their shadows, not their power. What remained was her own, unshaken, unbowed, and unbroken. And though she knew the road ahead would still hold battles, Emma also knew she had crossed the point of no return. She was no longer the woman who whispered her fears into a journal. She was the woman who had faced her deepest betrayal and turned it into freedom. When the dust settled from the courtroom battle, the ripples spread quickly through the city. Ryan's family name, once untouchable, was dragged through scandal. Clients began to pull back, murmurs of corruption and deceit tarnishing the reputation that had taken decades to build. Lauren, who had once reveled in flaunting her new life, found herself unfollowed, uninvited, and unwelcome in the very circles she had clawed to be part of. Yet, Emma didn't take joy in their downfall. Revenge, she realized, was hollow, it could never rebuild what had been broken inside her. Instead, she turned her gaze forward. The same community that had once whispered behind her back now whispered in admiration of her courage in standing up against giants. With the case behind her, Emma poured her energy into her architecture firm. It wasn't glamorous at first, her office was still that tiny apartment, her conference room the corner of a coffee shop, but it was hers. Every design she signed carried her name, not borrowed power. And that, more than any court ruling, was her victory. For Emma, rebuilding wasn't only about blueprints and contracts, it was about mending the fractures within herself. She began therapy, not just to process the betrayal, but to finally confront the wounds she had carried since childhood. For the first time, she admitted to herself how much her fear of abandonment had shaped her choices, how deeply she had craved safety even at the cost of her own needs. Therapy was messy, often painful, but it gave her tools to rebuild from the inside. She also reconnected with her mother, Clara, not just as a daughter, but as a woman beginning to understand the sacrifices Clara had made. Their conversations grew deeper, layered with honesty and gratitude. Emma also gave herself permission to rediscover joy outside the confines of romance. She picked up sketching in the park, joined Grace on impromptu weekend trips, and even found herself laughing again, a laughter untainted by guilt or pretense. For the first time in years, she was building a life that wasn't defined by who stood beside her, but by what she chose for herself. Through all of this, Michael was a steady presence, never overbearing, never rushing her healing. He showed up in small, unglamorous ways, helping her carry blueprints when her arms were full, bringing coffee during late nights, listening when the weight of it all felt too much. His kindness wasn't performative, and his silence wasn't distance, it was respect. He understood what it meant to rebuild from ruin, carrying scars of his own from a divorce that had left him raw. Their connection grew slowly, like roots winding quietly beneath the surface, strong not because it burned hot, but because it was steady, earned. Emma never felt pressured to define what they were. Instead, she felt safe exploring who she was becoming. And in that safety, something tender blossomed, not a fairytale romance, but a partnership grounded in truth. By the time her firm secured its first major project, Emma stood taller than ever, not because Ryan and Lauren had fallen, but because she had risen. The story no longer belonged to betrayal, but to empowerment. And though Michael walked beside her, Emma knew the most important love she had found was the one she had finally given herself. Months later, Emma unlocked the glass doors to her new office, the morning light pouring in across freshly painted walls. It wasn't grand, no skyscraper view, no polished marble floors, but it was hers. The space smelled faintly of new wood and ink, filled with the hum of possibility. Against one wall stood her proudest possession, a framed blueprint from her very first independent client, a cafe design that had launched her into legitimacy. She hung it like a badge of honor, proof that she hadn't just survived the storm but had built something meaningful from the wreckage. Standing in the center of the room, Emma closed her eyes and breathed deeply. 4 years, she had sought safety in others, Ryan's promise of stability, Lauren's presence in her life, but this office was proof that safety could be something she created for herself. Me. It was the quiet victory she had longed for, not flashy, not loud, but steady and real. On a soft spring afternoon, Emma carried a carefully wrapped box into a local charity shop. Inside was the wedding dress she had once chosen with trembling hope, its silk and lace untouched by vows never spoken. The volunteer smiled, reaching for the box, but Emma paused, slipping in a handwritten note folded neatly between the folds of fabric. "May this dress bring someone joy, not chains." Her fingers lingered a moment on the lid before she let it go, her chest lighter than she had expected. Walking out of the shop, she didn't look back. For Emma, the gesture wasn't about erasing the past, but about transforming it, taking something that had symbolized heartbreak and giving it a chance to be reborn in someone else's story. That evening, as she walked home, she felt no sting, no ache, just an airy freedom in knowing she no longer carried that weight. She had chosen release, and with it, the space to step fully into her future. The final scene unfolded not in a courtroom or an office, but outside a cafe tucked into a lively street. Emma sat at a small table, sketchbook open, pencil moving with easy strokes. The world bustled around her, laughter, clinking cups, the hum of the city, but for the first time in years, she felt completely at ease. Michael approached with 2 steaming coffees, placing one gently beside her sketch without interrupting her flow. She looked up, their eyes meeting in a quiet exchange that needed no words. He wasn't her savior, he was simply her companion, steady and present. Emma closed the sketchbook, leaned back, and let a smile spread across her face. "Scars don't mean I'm broken," she said softly, as much to herself as to him. "They mean I survived." Michael returned the smile, raising his cup in a silent toast. The camera of life seemed to pull back then. Emma, sketchbook in hand, coffee beside her, the city alive around her. No longer defined by betrayal, she was a woman standing firmly in her own story, finally free.